Well, hello there and welcome to this video. We're going to be learning more about FileMaker in this video. My name is Matt Petrowski. I'm the editor over at FileMakerMagazine.com. And in this video, we're taking a look at some data planning. We've been going through a lot of different topics in this series about data, schema, and structure. And we're going to get into the data planning. So stick with me and we'll be on my desktop in a few. All right, so what do we have for today's lesson? Well, the first thing that we need to take a look at is something that I'm referencing actually down in the comments. If you're watching this after the replay or if you're watching this live, I've left a link to a file that we used for yesterday's lesson. We always have a little bit of review. Sometimes questions come up that people have. If you'd like to follow along, you can open that file, and I'm going to open mine right now, and I've called it Relationships 2. Now, yesterday in the previous lesson, what we learned about was structuring a relationship that allows us to filter a value list in order to present options. And there was a comment on that video that we absolutely all need to know about as FileMaker learners, and that is a change in the way that FileMaker's relationships works. Of course, a change really only applies if you are familiar with the older way of how FileMaker used to work. Now, the comment was this: I created a new record in the database, and what we have is our intention was to basically show a value list that would only present the values that a user does not already have added to their join table. And if you're unfamiliar with what a join table is, go back a few lessons and you'll learn about that one. In fact, if you're interested and you just found this video because of a keyword search you did, click on the channel icon and that will take you to my channel here on YouTube, and you'll be able to actually look at all of the different series and be able to take these in order if you'd like, because they are sequential. So what we're looking at is this section right here where we want to be able to have a value list, and what the person did is they came and they created a new record, which I'm going to do right now. Now the problem that we have that we created for ourselves is that there is no relationship for FileMaker to resolve. We created this problem where what we have is this no values defined. Now, what this simply is that FileMaker cannot show proper values from a value list or proper related values when there isn't any relationship that actually exists. Now, it used to be the case in older versions of FileMaker that if a relationship had nothing on one side, FileMaker would still present you with options. But FileMaker changed somewhere around the lines of, I think, 12 or 13, I forget where it was. But basically what happens is, in this scenario, our relationship is based on this particular field right here of unstored attendance. We want a list of all of the the things that a user is currently attending, or a person in our database. Well, because there's nothing for FileMaker to relate to. So in order for our relationship, as I bring up the defined database, our non-equijoin right here, in order for this relationship to resolve, we have to have something on both sides of the relationship. It's just how FileMaker's relationships work. And it totally didn't even dawn on me to tell you this in the previous lesson, and I'm telling you now that we need to solve that problem. So this unstored calculated field, we need to put in a little bit of logic into that, and we're going to go do that right now. And this will be the case on any relationship where you are setting up an ad hoc relationship where you want to get some data out, whether you want to display it within a portal or filter a value list. So we'll take a look at this. Currently, what we're saying is the unstored attendance needs to give me a list of the attendees that this of the events, the foreign keys, the ID of the events that this person is currently attending. Well, what if they don't have any? Well, in order for FileMaker to have a valid relationship, we need to make sure that if we don't find any, let's actually give FileMaker a value. FileMaker needs a value if there are none, so that it can actually go and say, okay, give me everything that is not equal to what I have. Because if FileMaker has nothing, it'll say, well, that doesn't equal anything, and it doesn't not equal anything, so I can't give you anything. So we have to give it something that actually doesn't make sense. Most of the time, you can just return a 0, or give it, a bogus value. So this is pretty easy. We're going to need to simply convert this function or this calculation into a let function. I'm going to do that with my little keyboard shortcut here, typing in fmlet. I've got an expansion tool that I use. You can find this on the magazine website. Click on resources and search for the keyword Typinator. If you're on a Macintosh, that's the program that I'm using. So I'm going to call this attendance. I'm terrible with that. I got to get the spelling on that. I forget which one it is. Attendance. So we are going to put that in right there. And now, as a result, we're going to put an if condition. Now I didn't have to use a let function in this particular situation, but just out of habit, I sort of do that. I know that from a performance standpoint, this isn't a calculation that I'm going to be showing on the layout a whole lot. I'm really not worried about that much extra effort that FileMaker is going to have, and let just allows me to keep things clean. So now I'm going to type fm if, just a function that expands out for me the way that I like to format my my if conditions. So here we need to have a condition, and I'm basically going to say if the attendance, and in this case I'm going to use another function of is empty. So I'm going to select what I normally want there, I'm going to cut that, and then I'm going to type in is empty, and it's going to filter to that. So I can now give FileMaker, or I can give this particular field nothing, or a value if there is nothing. Otherwise, I can give it the list that it normally should have. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to say if it is empty, then what am I going to give? And this is where you can sort of just give anything, because anything in this field is going to match nothing on the other side of the relationship. So I can put in a 0, I can put in false. That's typically what I do, is just put in false. Otherwise, the default of what I want to have happen is I actually want the attendance. I want the list itself, because that's going to be the list of keys of what the person is attending, which will match all of the events that they are not attending. Give me the proper value list. So that's our solution right here to this. Notice that it will still be unstored. I will not be able to have that be a stored calculation. Even if I try to check this, it'll tell me it can't, and it'll go back and check it anyway. And that's okay. That's exactly what I want. So this should be the solution to the problem that we had. Click OK, and now I should be able to get all of my, no, I don't get my values. All right, let's move forward. This is where we solve problems with FileMaker. What I can do, hopefully, is give me a list of keys. Let's make sure that it's not the value list itself. All right, let's go and do something else. I'm going to put in a get UUID. I don't know why it would do this, and I may have to solve this live. No values. That's very intriguing to me. I wonder if maybe some of you know what's going on in the chat. I'm completely stumped here as to why this is not working the way that it should, because as far as I know, out of my FileMaker knowledge, this one is showing me the items I don't have. I go to my Bob record. This one is showing me the one record that he does not have. These are listing key values. I move to this one, to the next record. This is a key value that you can see every time I click into it. It's just going to be a random UUID, but it is definitely a key value that does not exist over in the values table. And I don't know why FileMaker is still saying no values. As far as I'm aware, FileMaker should be giving me that value list. And I may have to research this one in terms of why it's doing it. This is why doing things live allows you to figure out what's going on. Maybe somebody's got something in the chat. I'm going to take a quick check. Nope. Looks like nobody has anything in the chat. And I might have to save that one for actually the next video. I will get that solved. That's the cool thing about FileMaker. You can typically solve it and find out why. I don't know why FileMaker is actually doing this. Typically, it should, because I have a value in this field and this value does not match any of the other key values, I should be getting a valid value list. For everything that I've done, there's some little switch somewhere that I need to set in order to make this work. So we'll have to save that for when we get to it on another video. Because what I do want to cover is, and if anybody does know, put in the comments before I actually get back to solving it, and I will put the solution into the comments in order to make that value list actually show up so that you can choose from all of the events. Just a little tweak somewhere, probably not coming up with it off the top of my head as I do this live. All right, so 10 minutes in. Let's get to the main topic that I wanted to cover in this video, which is data planning. So I've got a couple of examples here with regards to data planning, and if you want to follow along with this particular example, you can go to the Get Started option, and you can choose one of the databases. The other one I'm going to be giving you a little bit later, probably in a following lesson, as we start to talk about data planning. As I scroll down here in this copy of FileMaker 16, I'm looking at this option right here, See Advanced Solutions. And when you click on that, you're going to have this option right here, one of the databases, which is time billing. So one of the things that I'm going to be covering moving forward is going to be basically building a database. By building a database, we're going to be able to cover a lot of different things as we cover all the different areas of FileMaker. I already have this database loaded for me in particular, and we're going to look at two different ways of solving the same thing from the standpoint of data planning. So what I have here are two different approaches to a time billing database, and that's what we're going to be doing. We'll probably using this for a number of the videos moving forward. We'll be moving off of the events that we were working with, because this is something that probably everybody pretty much can use. Not everybody needs event planning, but a lot of people want to track things with regards to time. And they want to do it on a project-by-project basis, and if it's going to be multi-user, then they typically want to be able to allow users to do that. Maybe you have a team of users. So the way that you approach your data planning, that's what this topic is about today. Typically, the way that I start off with data planning is sitting down just with a piece of paper and thinking about all of the actual items that I'm going to want to track. So clearly, as soon as you start to talk to yourself, you're going to say, okay, we've got projects, we've got maybe in multiple developers, and then maybe we've got, different pieces of time that need to be tracked. So let's take a look at how this was actually approached over here in FileMaker's time billing application. We can see right here when we zoom in, we've got a company, we've got some ancillary data of website, first name, last name, whoever it is for. Then we have time billings, where each of these billings, if we add a new time billing, it's going to ask us for a new customer. We'll just put one in here. And there we go. It wanted us to select it, and we'll do another new time billing. We'll say new customer. So the way that this particular database has decided to solve this problem is, my guess, and I just opened the database, I haven't even taken a look at this, is that they're probably tracking the time billings with a start time and an end time under the assumption that that's a period of time that we're working on this data. So when I select on this particular time billing, I'm probably, it looks like they've got a billing here where you can actually have multiple different time billings. So there we go. Let's add a line item. Say on the 24th, and let's say we started at 8 and we ended at, there we are. They are doing things based on each record in this database, or a time billing is basically you're going to bill for time, and then within that bill of that time that you're going to bill, multiple things can happen, and probably because they can be categorized to multiple different categories. So now we've put in another item. So as you start to talk through what it is you need when you're planning for your data, things actually come about that you start to notice that that's going to impact your data structure. So we know that we're going to have projects. Those projects are now going to have multiple categories. I might have multiple people who are going to be doing those billings. I don't know that this database actually accounts for that. And that's basically what you do, is you start to run through all of the different possible scenarios before you actually go into the building phase. You definitely want to write down as many different questions as you can about the data that you're going to work with. So in this particular case, I knew before I started my own database about tracking time, that this wasn't necessarily going to work for me. When we go into the defined database on this database provided by FileMaker, and we look at the tables, and again, I have not been in this database before right now. I'm just basically going in, taking a look and dissecting how FileMaker has approached this problem so that I can contrast it against my own and give you some insight into how you actually go about planning out your data. So obviously we've got customers. Again, for me, that would be people, because I might be dealing with multiple different things. In fact, within the people table, I would probably have a combination of customers and employees and be able to keep them all in one table. It's just how I prefer to work. Then I have a time billing, which means I'm going to be billing a customer for something that can include multiple different time slots. Those multiple different time slots are going to be the time billing data, sort of like we have for line items for invoices. And so when I go into this, there we have a start time and an end time. So very much, this is a very discrete start and stop type of event where you work on one specific thing for a specific period of time. All right, so I've explained for the most part what I want to about FileMaker system. Now let's compare this to a system that I use in terms of my own data planning. Let's go take a look at this database over here that I use called Time Tracker. Time Tracker has taken, the approach that I've taken is a much different approach in the way that I'm dealing with the data. Now, please don't judge this on its looks. This is a very stereotypical FileMaker database where it is just hacked together, all the pieces are thrown together, stirred in a pot really quickly. It's ugly, it's messy, but it's done just so that I can work on it and use it. In fact, the reason that I'm going to be using this is it's a great excuse for me to clean it up while I teach you how I structure data and how I build database systems. Looking at this data and looking at the tables, we are going to see a lot different structure. First off, my startup table, it's just something I do in all of my databases. Go look at the startup splash screen video that I have here on YouTube. It's a very good video about why and how you should create a startup table and startup fields. And you can also use that for a splash screen. It talks about a splash screen, but it focuses on the startup process. In this database, I do not have time billing. I basically just have which databases for me is actually analogous to projects. So I should have actually just named this projects. And I'll do that right now by clicking the change. FileMaker doesn't really care about that change, and I know that I'm safe to change it because I haven't done any literal references to that table. So I basically have time and projects. But the distinction here between the way that FileMaker did implement their solution and the way that I actually implemented mine is that when we take a look and sort this according to these, I have some of my standard fields that I put into all of my different databases where I have a timestamp, creation, modification, etc. But when it comes to the other time, where's duration, time? Well, let me look at where it is. It's on the, I don't think I called it duration. Did I? I believe I did. I did call it duration. Huh. Very odd. All right, I only have one timestamp is ultimately what I'm trying to get down to. Sorry about my confusion right there. I am using a distinction where rather than choosing to keep a start time and an end time on the same record, I'm only keeping one time value in each record, and then I'm tying those multiple records to a given project. So it's just a completely different approach where when you're thinking about your data, you may be thinking, and this is the whole reason for me explaining this, you may be thinking from the mindset of, I need to get, when I'm going to work on something, I'm going to start at a certain time and I'm going to stop at a certain time. And you may be thinking, I have a start time field and I have an end time field. But my whole reason for explaining to you in this video is that you don't have to use that data structure when you can apply a user interface that can basically achieve the exact same result but stores the data in a completely different way. So here's the takeaway that we're going to have from today's lesson. Aside from the fact that I'm not going to take you down the complexity of this whole database, other than to say that by storing just one time value in one record, I've now created I've imposed a forced structure upon myself where I have to associate two records together. I always have to have one that's going to be a start time and one that's going to be an end time. And I did exactly that. When I come in to do my work and I select a given project, so let's say, I don't know, project 2 right here, and I click load, I'm using FileMaker's find in order to find all of my particular items. Now you can see a distinction between the two records as I zoom in right here. One of the records says that it is an open record, and another record says that it's a close record. Now these two records are tied together via a common ID. They share a same ID which represents a work session. What this has done for me is it allows me, because I've broken out the data and said, I don't want to put the start time and the end time on the same record, because out of this data, I know that I'm going to be able to extract and pull more statistical information, such as trends and other types of information, than if I had stored it where I put a start time and an end time in the same database or in the same record. The reason being, by doing this, I'm actually able to find out by looking at, let's say, let me see all of the timestamps, and here's the timestamp. I don't know why I was thinking it was the duration. I was having a little creation timestamp. Yeah, I'm using the creation timestamp, I believe, is what I'm using for actually tracking the time difference between two different dates. I was confused there about my duration, where my duration is actually calculating out the time difference between two different times. But you can see right here that the records actually come in sequence. Here is the time that I started, probably for this particular session, where I started at 3:33 and then I ended at 4:24. And then I'm taking the duration, and the duration is being calculated only because of the fact that it's a close record. So any of the records, when they are close records, those records actually get the duration time, and they're just looking at their partner record where they actually take the start time. Now, what this has allowed for me to do from the standpoint of collecting this data is that I'm breaking the data down to its absolute smallest component. In this case, the absolute smallest component is just the timestamp. And the timestamp alone of when something happens, and I don't care. I don't care whether it's the start or the stop or a break or a pause in a break or whatever it is. All I have to know is that when I'm planning my data structure, I'm going to have to tie these together. And if I do that, I get the better advantage. The advantage being I can find out what is the average time that I actually stop on a daily basis, because I can now go into this database and find all close events. I can find out other information, all kinds of stuff. When you break things down to their smallest units, typically you get more access in order to derive data, and you don't have to work as hard to put in structure. So say, for example, over here on the time billing, in order for me to find out in this database, different pieces of information, it's harder for me to pull them out if they've all been glommed into one record. And this may be a bad example because we're really only talking about two pieces of data right now, a start time and an end time. But my hope is that through the course of watching this video, you'll be able to take whatever it is that you're working on and start to ask all kinds of different questions that maybe you're not asking. So in this database, the question is, okay, I have a start time and an end time. But maybe the questions that never came up were, if I'm tracking and dealing with multiple people, and I want to find out when most of them are working on this type of work, or what is the average duration of time that people are taking for breaks, or what are the things that, how early are people stopping their projects, or how do I correlate this data against How quickly are the projects getting done? When you have things broken down to a more atomic level, it's easier to extract that type of information rather than boxing yourself into a particular structure. So hopefully my description has been somewhat usable. I know that it's very difficult and confusing when you don't have a direct grasp on what has been implemented and how you actually get what you want out of a database. But through the course of the upcoming videos, what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be giving you a copy of my database. And what I encourage you to do is take a look at the time billing database and try to figure out, how would this be usable to you in terms of a utility that you can use, and would it actually answer all of the questions that you might want to answer? If you work with multiple people, how are you going to track multiple projects for multiple people and then be able to find out the answer to whatever questions you might have about that? Whatever it is, when are people most productive? When are we able to, can we find out, what's the most productive time that people are working, and all of those different types of questions. That's what you're going to need to be able to do when you have things broken down. Now, the last thing I'm going to leave you with for today about data planning is one of the things that I do is I go into a spreadsheet. So this is just you can use Google Sheets, you can use Excel, you can use whatever you want to use in order to plan out your data. But the thing that I do is I typically go into my worksheet and then I start to think about all the primary things that I'm going to track. So I'm going to have projects, I'm going to have customers, which for me is actually going to be people. I am going to have, within those projects, I'm going to have what types of projects. I'm going to have database projects. Maybe I have graphic work that I'm going to do. This is just a brainstorming process that you go through. What do I want to know about the time that is actually going to be tracked? I want to know the duration for how long it's going to be. I want to know maybe how long breaks are for, length of breaks. I'm going to be wanting to know, what else would I want to know? Off the top of my head, I don't want to bore you with me thinking about them right now, because I know you just want this information and then you want to be able to go off. But this brainstorming process that I'm describing right here is nothing more than a brain dump. There is no structure that is done on this right now. All I want to do is I want to capture all of the different things that I can think about. And if using a different program works for you, use another program, an outlining program, a mind mapping program. There's a really good one that I use called MindNode. Let's open up that one. Let's create a new document. And this is a mind mapping. If mind mapping works for you, do that. Customers, and then you've got a little child off of customers, and you've got customer types, and then off of that you've got whatever else. Create a new item in here. Mind mapping is another good way to actually break things down in terms of helping you to visually see what are all of the different questions that you have about the data that you want to track before you actually go in and start to break that data down. I like the spreadsheet method. If you like mind maps, go ahead and use those. Whatever it is, use some type of tool that allows you to flesh things out before you get into developing the database. So if you have any questions about the process of data planning, or if you have any suggestions about tools that you use, put those down in the comments or throw them in the chat. We can talk about them coming up here as we come up on the 30-minute mark. There isn't much else that I do with regards to data planning. Once I've got everything here on this spreadsheet and I've sort of formulated what I want to work with, I then start to drag things around. That's why I like the spreadsheet. You can do it with the mind mapping too. You can drag things around. It's really pretty nice. Mind mapping, I like that. Mind mapping is actually pretty cool. You can create as many different things and branch them off. It helps you with the aspect of what are actually core entities that you need to track versus what are attributes of those entities, because that's what actually gets confusing. For me, I'm not tracking anything about customer types of people is what I'm tracking. And that is confusing for some new FileMaker learners because they're thinking of, I have customers, vendors, employees, etc. And for me, it works in the reverse. And for duration and time breaks, these actually would get moved around, and I'm dealing with time. And what types of time do I have? Okay, well, I'll move this around here. I've got a start and I've got a stop. Does that mean that I need those individually in a actual record? No, it doesn't. They can be on their record themselves, and I can actually then plan my data around that. For the time, I definitely want to know the duration. And then I definitely want to know length of breaks is going to be something that maybe stands outside of that. So what I'm doing is I'm starting to put all of my main data entities on one side, or if this works better for you, go over here and put it up in the top. If you're a top-down person and you like doing that way, put them into the columns. That's what's great about a spreadsheet. You can really move things around by dragging and dropping and put them into their different places. So I've got database projects, I've got graphic projects, I've got types of people, and so on. So I hope that helps you out with regards to planning your own structure, getting things started so that you can basically put good structure behind that. So what we're going to be doing in the upcoming videos is we're going to be taking a look at how do we apply this structure that I've started with. This structure of, we're going to be rebuilding this particular little time tracker database, walking through it, and actually putting in the good UI. I have a junky UI currently right now that basically, this is how cruddy it is in case you want to know. I've got a popover here that you click on the popover and it actually opens another junky database where I actually put in a list of my projects. Now, one of the things that my solution doesn't do is for this list to come up, you always have things over time that expire. My current little time tracking database just shows this massive list of projects, and it would be nice for this list to actually show me the active projects that I'm working on while it keeps an archive of that. And there's so many different features and functionality that we'll be able to put into this database. We'll be building it as we go along through this series and taking a look at that. I will get to that problem that we have on the relationships and actually making it resolve. I don't know what's going on with FileMaker, but we can take a look at my comments as we switch over there now. See if anybody actually did respond to that. Maybe not. Imagine you need to attend DevCon and then select. All right. So we've got a few here. Hellos. Antonio, imagine you need to attend DevCon and then select a course. How can we make a selection with pop-up menus with more options like in a product within a category? Antonio, we can get to that. I referenced, somebody had asked a question in the video prior about actually doing, the common thing is called conditional value lists, but I think of them as hierarchical value lists because typically with a hierarchy, you're starting at a top level and you make a selection, and that first selection then makes the next selection of a value list dependent upon that first selection. So like, for example, I think the example I use in a file that I have on the magazine website is when you select on a brand of cars, say Ford versus Toyota, when you select on Ford, you then want a list of all Ford models. And then within those Ford models, maybe you have a third level of a list where you actually want to select and just give the different, maybe one has a V6 engine versus a V8 engine. So you've got different options on those. Most people call those conditional value lists because the second and third value lists present their options based on the condition of the selection based on the first. But it's a hierarchy based on everything starts at, you have a first level and then a second level and then a third level and a fourth level. Again, I will put the links to articles that I have in the magazine website where I've got all kinds of those. Some of them use very complex SQL, and others will attempt to solve them within FileMaker. The problem within FileMaker is because FileMaker doesn't have circular references within its relationship graph, for however many levels you want to go deep on a given hierarchy, you typically have to have that many extra relationships. So there's ways around that, but you have to use FileMaker's execute SQL in order to do that. And that gets into the territory of a little complex for new FileMaker learners, so I haven't been wanting to cover that here. Jean-Pierre, do you use timestamp 2 minus timestamp 1 to get the duration? Yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. In fact, when we show things on the screen, when we take a look at the file, as we switch over here, what we'll see is that all of these are tied together in terms of their ID values. So if I show the ID value, it's a self-relationship based on the ID value on this. And remember, with your primary and your foreign keys, you can link pretty much everything together. Let's see what we've got in here. 2C. I won't be able to show you right off the top, but basically this ID links to the companion record, and then groups of records can be grouped into a work session. So it's just a different approach, but it achieves the same result. But as we'll see, it gives you a little bit more flexibility. All right, next question we've got here. That looks like ERDs. Duration? Yes, the duration is what we're getting. Well, using mind mapping would be necessary if, as I mentioned before, FMI just included a tab in the database manager to map up the structure graphically. And I think HBH groups, if I'm not mistaken, your response there is in regards to what is my actual ERD, my entity relationship diagram, my true data structure, as opposed to all of the superfluous table occurrences that I actually put into play for the purpose of facilitating FileMaker's user interface. And yeah, that's definitely it's just one of the things that we have as a result of working with FileMaker. But it looks like we don't have any other questions there about data planning. Hopefully today's lesson was somewhat informative. I felt as I was giving it, I felt a little bit like, where is this going? It's always hard to explain something in the abstract until you actually have an example that you work on and you actually see, okay, here's where I get the benefit from actually doing that. And the biggest benefit that we're going to find out about this particular database is being able to do a find in this database is going to be to extract data by being able to do a find is going to allow us to get more of the data that we might want to get rather than locking us into a structure. So that's part of the whole point of why I was giving this lesson before we actually go into building this database and making it happen, rebuilding this and then putting on a nice interface and doing everything really cool like. Again, it really all boils down to how do you want to use the database? How is this database going to be used by people? So in this particular example, it's very clear that there's a structure here in terms of, they want to see a customer. Once they go onto that customer, they wanted to see distinct groups of data. I don't know that this one actually... Yep, it does have it does have rates, so you can actually charge different rates, $190 an hour versus $200. So each of your different, that's one of the questions that you have to answer. Do I charge differently for this particular service versus this service? And so all these questions, those are things that you have to answer as you plan out your data. Then you just put it in FileMaker and you just start to hack away. One thing to remember is FileMaker is so flexible and data is so flexible. Never, as a FileMaker learner, be afraid that when you go start down a certain path, that you're going to lock yourself into a corner. Yes, there are times that you can do that, but my best piece of advice, if you're just learning FileMaker, is take all of that fear, wad it up, and throw it out the window. Because once you've got data in, data can be pulled apart. It's like Play-Doh, and you can flow it in so many different ways that you can change and adapt your structure. If it doesn't work today, yeah, you may have a little bit more work, but it's not so much work that you've just completely put yourself in a corner and you're not able to fix it. We're always able to push and pull within FileMaker and change and adapt things. We can always export, we can always import, we can create new tables, we can copy fields from one table and put them into another, and you really shouldn't be worried about a particular structure. Just keep learning, learn from videos like this, other videos on YouTube and other courses, and you'll get it. you'll be able to make a database that you will be extremely proud of and happy to use. And that's our goal, get people to use it. All right, I think that's going to make a wrap for today. As I switch over here, let's ramp up my exit. And I let you know that if you want to subscribe and get notified about these videos, you can do that. This will come up right here and you'll get notified. Click that little bell icon if you want the notifications. And the next video in this series will be coming up right here. We'll be heading down looking at that time database, something useful to most all of us, hopefully. All right, until next time, see you later.